Welcome to Betrayal Stories. In today's video, we explore a quiet moment that began like any other and slowly turned into something impossible to ignore. This is not a story about recklessness or intention. It's a story about silence, about what happens when routine replaces connection, and about the dangerous power of feeling seen after years of feeling invisible. Listen carefully because this story isn't loud. It doesn't rush. It unfolds the way real life does, one breath at a time. We were sitting on the couch, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched, but not so close that it felt intentional. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the television and a lamp in the corner that hadn't been moved in years. An old movie played in the background, one of those slow black and white films that people say they love but rarely finish. The kind that hums instead of speaks. I had chosen it without thinking. Maybe because it felt familiar. Maybe because I didn't want to pay attention. Every few minutes, his leg brushed against mine. It was so light I wondered if I imagined it. A shift in position. A stretch. Nothing that demanded a reaction. At least that's what I told myself. I stayed still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, eyes fixed on the screen, even though I wasn't really watching. The air felt heavier than it should have, like the room was holding its breath. I didn't plan for anything to happen. I hadn't even allowed the thought to form. Plans require intention, and intention means responsibility. This moment didn't arrive with either. It crept in quietly, unnoticed, until it was already there. When his hand moved, it wasn't sudden. It didn't startle me. It drifted, hesitant, as if guided by instinct rather than decision. His fingers brushed the outside of my leg, barely grazing the fabric. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. My breath hitched. Every muscle tightened. I waited for him to pull away. He didn't. And I didn't move either. That pause, those few seconds where neither of us did anything, felt longer than the entire movie. In that stillness, something inside me shifted. Not dramatically. Not like a switch being flipped. More like a door opening that I hadn't realized was closed. My name is Dana. I'm 46 years old. I've been married to the same man, Paul, for more than 20 years. We have 2 children, a house with monthly payments, and a life built on schedules and responsibilities. From the outside, it looks stable, predictable, safe. Inside, it feels quiet, Paul, and I don't fight. We don't raise our voices or slam doors. We don't throw accusations across the room. But we don't laugh much either. We exist beside each other, moving through the same space without really touching it together. He comes home. I cook dinner. We clean up. We watch separate screens. We sleep. Then we do it all again the next day. At some point, affection turned into coordination. Love turned into logistics. And without noticing when it happened, stopped feeling like a woman and started feeling like a role. Tyler was never supposed to be part of this story. He's 31 now. Though in my mind I can still see him as a teenager with awkward limbs and an easy smile. He's the son of my closest friend. He grew up in our house as much as his own movie nights on the couch. Loud summer afternoons by the pool, holidays where he ate too much and laughed too loudly. He used to call me Miss Dana. Back when the world was simpler and lines were clearer. I remember his high school graduation. I remember how proud his mother looked. I remember how he hugged me just a second longer than most people did, and how I didn't think anything of it at the time. Why would I? But time changes things, quietly, inevitably. Somewhere between college and adulthood, Tyler changed. He got taller, broader, quieter. The boyish energy softened into something steadier. There was still kindness in him, still that gentleness I remembered. But it carried weight now. Presence. He noticed things. He noticed when I wore something new. Even if it was just a different sweater. He noticed when I looked tired. When my smile didn't quite reach my eyes. He asked how I was and waited for the answer. Paul hadn't done that in years. Not because he didn't care. But because somewhere along the way, we stopped asking each other questions we were afraid to answer. That night, it was just the 2 of us. Paul had taken his medication early and fallen asleep upstairs the way he often did lately. Tyler had stayed after dinner to finish the movie. He said old films made him feel calm, like time slowed down when everything else felt too loud. I sat beside him like I always had, like I'd done dozens of times before. But the room felt different. The television flickered, shadows moving across the walls in soft patterns. I couldn't tell you what scene was playing. All I could feel was the warmth of his leg against mine and the awareness that came with it. When his fingers rested more fully on my thigh, not pressing, not demanding, just there. My thoughts scattered. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I stared straight ahead, afraid that if I looked at him, something irreversible would happen. A long moment passed. Then another dot. His hand didn't move away. Instead, his palm turned slightly upward, open, as if waiting. The gesture was subtle, almost uncertain. I clutched the blanket tighter in my lap, grounding myself in the familiar texture. My mind raced through reasons and rules and consequences. But none of them seemed strong enough to cut through the feeling rising in my chest. "Hey," he whispered, so softly it barely carried over the sound of the film. "You okay?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. That was all it took. His hand settled more firmly, still gentle, still controlled. The warmth of his touch spread through me, awakening something I had convinced myself no longer mattered. I had spent years telling myself that I didn't need affection, that this was just how long marriages evolved. Comfortable, quiet, but in that moment, I realized quiet isn't the same as comfort. Sometimes it's just absence. We didn't rush. Nothing about it felt hurried or careless. We didn't even look at each other at first. He watched the movie. I watched the way his jaw tightened, the way his breath changed when he realized I wasn't pulling away. "I'll stop if you want," he murmured, the words barely more than air. I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't know what I should say, but because I knew what I wanted, and that terrified me more than anything else. When I finally turned to face him, the world seemed to narrow to the space between us. The movie faded into background noise. The room felt smaller, closer. The look in his eyes wasn't hungry or reckless. It was searching, careful. The connection that followed wasn't about impulse. It was about recognition. About two people acknowledging something they couldn't name without breaking it. Time blurred. I remember the weight of the silence, the way every small sound made my heart race. A noise in the hallway, a settling pipe maybe, or the house adjusting made us both freeze. Reality pressed in around us, reminding us of where we were and what this meant. "We shouldn't," he whispered, resting his forehead briefly against mine. I knew he was right. And yet, knowing didn't make the feeling disappear. When the movie ended and the credits rolled, neither of us moved. We sat there in the aftermath of a choice we hadn't spoken out loud. Eventually, he stood, smoothing his shirt, avoiding my eyes as if looking at me would make it harder to leave. "What now?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. He just nodded once and headed for the door. The next morning, the kitchen felt different. The sunlight was too bright. My coffee went untouched as I stood at the counter replaying every second of the night before. When Tyler passed through, grabbing a glass of water, we didn't speak. Our silence was heavy, full of things unsaid. Later that week, our hands brushed in the laundry room as we reached for the same basket. We both froze, the air thick with awareness. "I can't stop thinking about it," he said, his voice low. "Me neither," I admitted. We both knew what that meant. We told ourselves it couldn't happen again, that it shouldn't. But wanting something doesn't end just because you decide it's wrong. I started avoiding certain rooms after dark. I locked doors not to keep anyone out, but to keep myself contained. Still, memories lingered, the warmth of his presence, the way he made me feel visible again. One evening, we sat on the back steps as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky painted in soft shades of gold and orange. He sat at the far end, leaving space between us, respectful and restrained. "You've been quiet," he said. "I've been thinking," I replied. "So have I." I looked at him then, really looked, and saw the same conflict reflected back at me. We didn't need to say the rest. The truth lived in the space between us. When he stood and walked away, I didn't say goodbye. I watched until he disappeared into the fading light, knowing that some moments don't need closure to leave a mark. Inside, Paul was doing the dishes. The sound of running water filled the kitchen. He glanced at me and asked, "You okay?" I nodded. But I wasn't, because the hardest part wasn't what happened. The hardest part was realizing how deeply I wanted it tanned. What that meant about everything? I thought I understood about my life. And that's where this story truly begins.